to welcome you all to this meeting today, celebrating the left's advances in Bolivia. Our meeting is called Solidarity with Bolivia, Power to the People. When we look back at the massive Friends of Bolivia event against the coup against Evo Morales in November 2019, and also our online events since then to mark the left's election victory just over a year and a half ago, it's really great to be chairing this event tonight as the people of Bolivia continue to build a better future and inspire the left across the world. We stand with those struggling for democracy, social progress, self-determination in Bolivia and indeed elsewhere. And we salute their victories, including against destabilizing efforts from anti-democratic elements of the right-wing opposition in Bolivia itself. We'll be hearing from a wide range of speakers this evening, and we're very pleased to be joined by so many of you, not only on Zoom, but also live streaming on YouTube and indeed on Facebook. As well as getting the latest, including eyewitness accounts from Bolivia, we will also be finding out why international solidarity is so important. In terms of a housekeeping notice, we have one speaker, our final speaker, Diego Pary, who will be speaking in Spanish. So if you want to hear the translation, please put yourself on the English channel. I'm sure you're sufficiently familiar with this. On my screen, it's at the top, but on your screen, it's probably at the bottom, the translation into English. In the chat, links will be posted to by our volunteers about how you can follow the Friends of Bolivia and show your support, including by making much needed donations. And I'm pleased now to welcome our first speaker. Our first speaker is someone who needs no introduction at all, but I will give him a little bit anyway. He is John McDonnell. He's the treasurer of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs, and he knows everything that there is to know about international solidarity. He will speak to us for 6 minutes. John, I'm very pleased to introduce you. The floor is yours.
Thanks for inviting me, Christine, and thank you for that. Just to say thanks for the Friends of Bolivia and all the other speakers. I'm looking forward to this evening. This is one of the key events in which we can, I suppose, link up with one another, but also learn so much more about what's happening in Bolivia. So yeah, thanks for inviting me. And thanks for Christine Blower for chairing this meeting. I should say that Christine Blower now, against all her will, has been forced into the House of Lords. And is now part of what can only be described as a red cell of resistance in the House of Lords, fighting against so many reactionary policies this government, but also seriously fighting against those policies, but also being able to raise international issues and bring in, I think, objective analysis to what's happening in the world and to provide an alternative as well. So thanks, Christine. It's just good to be with you here in Solidarity. The title of this event is Solidarity with Bolivia, the People in Power. And I think that the idea of people power politics, providing genuine alternatives to neoliberalism, is just more important than ever. In fact, it's the basis of our movement and our struggles across the globe now. And Bolivia now has become such a shining light of what people can do coming together in solidarity. Do you know, on the left in Britain, over the years, I suppose, much to our detriment, I think, we've often been good at giving our opinion on what people in other countries should be doing, but not really so good at listening and learning from other struggles around the world. And a number of those struggles for a better world that we need to be learning from today are taking place in Latin America and in Bolivia itself. So that's why it's important that we learn what's happening and also pick up some lessons about what we can do here and across Europe in particular. Other speakers will they'll go into more detail, but this is just some of the examples of the progressive people-powered policies that are being developed in Bolivia that have been particularly attractive to me. Some of you will know that I was the Shadow Chancellor, therefore responsible for developing Labour's policies, economic policies, under Jeremy Corbyn's administration. And there were many things that we developed in our manifestos that in some instances were, yes, were progressive, but in some instances now looking back on it, we may not have gone far enough. And one area which I think we could have gone further is how we redistributed wealth. We did introduce a whole package of taxation policies which would shift wealth from the hands of the few into the hands of the many. But there's some areas where we could have gone much further. And one of them, even though we introduced elements of a wealth tax, we never introduced or proposed the introduction of a comprehensive wealth tax. And that's why I'm so interested in what Bolivia has done. Bolivia has implemented a wealth tax, and partly it's in order to fund a national program against hunger. Do you know, in this country at the moment, we have people who are dependent on food banks, 7 million in a survey last week missing a meal each week, 3 million children missing meals because they can't afford the food because of the low incomes coming into their families. And the idea of Bolivia implementing a wealth tax that specifically addresses hunger is exactly what we need here at the moment. So I just think it's a shining example of a lesson that we could learn in this country. The other thing is the progressive government in Bolivia has also increased pensions, the minimum wage, and spending on health and education. Again, popular policies, but essential if you're going to build a civilized society in which is based upon social solidarity, exactly the way in which many of our ideas were developing in this country, but again, we need to go much further in learning the lessons of what's happening in Bolivia about how you mobilize support around those particular issues. Plus, the other lesson, in alliance with trade unions and social movements, Bolivia is starting to nationalize key industries, and resources are part of a real industrial strategy. We'll be looking at how that's developed over time. We'll be looking to see the examples that we can use in our arguments in here and across Europe. And we will be looking at the practical implementation of public ownership that Bolivia is developing. It's one of the battles that we now face ideologically within our own party, because under the new Labour leadership, there's been some retreat from the commitment to public ownership, although they refer to common ownership. So this is something actually from Bolivia, we'll be able to, I think, pick up the baton and use in our discussions here. Just in terms of our role here, I'd also like to say that, yeah, we have a duty to oppose the Tory government when they intervene in Latin America so badly as they do. Too often, they've helped to prop up the forces of reaction in Latin America. They've cozied up to Bolsonaro in Brazil as the Amazon burns, and as he labels anti-racist campaigners as terrorists and threatens a coup. This government has continued to have a supportive relationship with the Colombian government, despite it being one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a trade unionist. They've effectively backed the 2019 coup in Bolivia and a coup attempt in Venezuela the same year, adding their own sanctions to those of the US that the US put on the country. These are aggressive policies. They're the opposite of what's needed to help people in Latin America, help people achieve dignity, progress, and self-determination. But there is great hope and inspiration to us from the new wave of left-wing movements and election victories in that region. Our comrades in Bolivia, well, from them we'll hear today, have not only defeated a far-right coup regime, they're now getting on with the business of building a better society. Bolivia's economic approach of investment, not cuts, prioritizing people, their health, public services, and the environment, just shows to us what can be achieved if the political will is there. If the political will is there to transform people's lives, even in the most difficult circumstances. And I think my view, and I think the view of people listening, will be these socialist policies are the right ones, especially at this time of the health and economic and environmental crisis that people face. So for us, there's a clear lesson to be learned from Bolivia. The key issue for us as we seek to develop a transformative agenda in our own country, how we can not just learn from Bolivia, but how we can work in solidarity so that we reap the benefits in our individual countries, but also how we create now a new global socialist agenda that we can develop in the coming years together in solidarity. Solidarity.
John, thank you very much indeed. Perfect timing and a really useful, insightful contribution as ever, I must say. The twin pillars of learning and solidarity are really fundamental to what we're trying to do through all of these meetings, all of these international meetings, and in particular this evening with Bolivia. So our next speaker is Tim Young, who is going to speak again for 6 minutes on behalf of the Friends of Bolivia. Tim, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Christine. The last time I talked at a meeting such as this about the achievements of the Bolivian government led by President Arce, it was a year after Massa's decisive election win against which threw out the coup regime of Janine Áñez. And the new government's priorities then were to tackle the legacies of that coup regime: soaring poverty and inequality, the pandemic emergency, the urgent need for justice for those who'd suffered widespread repression under the coup regime, and the need to rebuild regional links and country-to-country relations that have been fractured under the coup regime. So if we look at the economy first, the new government's aim was to get out of the crisis that the coup regime and the pandemic had landed Bolivia in, and to continue the interrupted process of change and the anti-neoliberal agenda that had been that of Evo Morales. So the results have been good. The Bolivian economy has rebounded strongly and grown by 3.4% overall in 2021 after a massive drop in GDP of 9% in 2020. And growth is expected to be 3.8% in 2022, which is really good news for Bolivians. Now, the key policies here have been the bonus against hunger initiative that John referred to, targeted at over 4 million people, and the new wealth tax that John also referred to, which has actually collected twice as much as originally estimated. So really good news in terms of being able to redistribute the resources collected to those in need. There's been other measures too. An investment fund has been set up worth $214 million to finance initiatives and projects by municipal governments and indigenous communities. And the government has also successfully introduced new import substitution policies to cut imports and raise exports, which again has been successful. In terms of food sovereignty, a crucial issue, and to boost agricultural production, the Mas government has also set up a Bolivian agricultural production company. Lithium. Lithium, as we know, was a key aspect of the coup. Elon Musk's infamous remark about we'll coup whoever we want. That is the key to Bolivia's future, and the government is developing its own lithium-first industrial strategy to prevent transnational companies from exploiting the country's vast lithium reserves. And the government's also been collaborating with other lithium-producing Latin American states. If we look at health and tackling the COVID pandemic, the government's investment and coordination strategy is paying off here too. Its investment program has provided more than 60% of the population over 18 with a first dose, while 50% have been double vaccinated. The coup regime was appalling in terms of the treatment of indigenous communities and anti-coup protesters, and the search for justice is really important for the crimes committed during that regime. And the Mas government has been pursuing those who were responsible for it. So Áñez is currently on trial for violating the constitution when she seized power in November 2019. And former military and police commanders are also in trial in relation to the massacres of over 24 indigenous people at Sacaba and Sencata. The government's also promised to implement all the recommendations of the report into the massacres by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, including dismantling parapolice organizations and irregular repressive groups. If we look at those important regional and country-to-country relationships, which were broken up by the coup regime, the Mas government has already restored links with Venezuela and Cuba and other countries, and resumed participation in the trade, dialogue and security organisations, ALBA, CELAC and UNASUR. It's also keen to strengthen the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, CELAC, which is the intergovernmental mechanism for promoting cooperation and strengthening cross-country ties. It sees CELAC as an alternative to the Organization of American States, whose General Secretary, Luis Almagro, helped to legitimize the 2019 coup.
Mm.
The Bolivian government is determined not to let that matter rest until it's obtained a full investigation into IS's role in the coup. So, huge progress in getting back on course, but Bolivia's traditional elites still want to see the Arce government overthrown. And last October, opposition organisations led by main actors in the 2019 coup called for a civic strike against the Arce government with a list of reactionary demands. But they only actually managed to mobilise people in the low hundreds in various parts of the country. So apart from lockouts in a few wealthy districts in Santa Cruz, the civic strike came to nothing. And in contrast, a march for the homeland to La Paz in November was joined by over 1 million people to defend democracy and to support the Arce government. So looking forward, the way forward will be by no means easy for Bolivia. And as internationalists, echoing what John said earlier, we must give our support for the Mas, for social movements and the Arce government against any attempts by reactionary forces, both inside and outside the country, to restore by force a right-wing government that's intent on destroying those efforts by the Mas and Arce government to build a better society. Thank you.
Tim, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It's so great to be on a meeting where we hear such good news, good results. And I think the idea of these government-funded municipal projects sounds fascinating. And I look forward to finding out much more about that. As you say, the elites are, alas, always with us. So solidarity will continue to be needed to make sure. But the idea that they could only mobilise a few hundred, whereas Mas can mobilise millions is also good news. Our next speaker is Juana Maldonado. She's a Bolivian activist from Wiphalas across the world. Juana, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. And thank you to the Friends of Bolivia for inviting me to speak. And I'm speaking from Sydney, Australia. It's about 3:50 a.m. in Australia.
Thank you.
My name is Juana Maldonado, and I am a member of the Association for Human Rights in Bolivia, founded here in Sydney, Australia, in 2020. Before I speak about my topic, I would like to first, as it's common practice here, before any public event, to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land called Australia. This land was never ceded, therefore it always was and is, and it will always be Aboriginal land. This part of Sydney, from where I'm speaking to you, belongs to the Darramural people. I was asked to speak about the importance of international solidarity with the people of Bolivia and the process of change. As you all know, this process of transformation from a colonial, racist, Republican, and a Vega state into a plurinational, sovereign, and an inclusive state that recognizes the pre-colonial existence of Quechuas, Aymaras, Guaranis, Mojeños, Chiquitanos, Trinitarios, a total of 36 ethnic groups that compose the Bolivian population. This process of change that began in 2009 hasn't been easy because of the strong opposition to the minority, but economically and powerful and US-backed right-wing colonial and racist opposition. We believe that international solidarity is important because it's a tool for reducing inequality and social injustice. It draws people to promote human rights and peace among all nations. We Bolivians who have migrated to many parts of the world have organized ourselves in collectives and associations to express our solidarity with our compatriots in Bolivia and support the process of transformation. We are a case example of solidarity. Our association was formed here in Sydney as a reaction to the brutal repression by the unconstitutional government of Janine Áñez against the most vulnerable people. All around the world, dozens of similar solidarity groups were formed to denounce and protest the grave human rights violations. Another example of this is the formidable international organization called Wiphalas across the world, with whom we have closely worked in various activities. The principal objectives of our association is to defend the human rights of our compatriots in Bolivia. With this objective in mind, we have undertaken a series of activities like writing letters to international human rights organizations, denouncing the violations that were occurring in Bolivia during those 11 months of Janine Áñez's government. 37 were murdered in massacres of Sencata and Sacaba. Many more suffered brutal and racist repression, persecution, incarcerations, and torture. We have held, in the middle of the pandemic, public protests. We have approached our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Maurice Payne, and many other influential people of other international human rights organizations like the United Nations, and asked them to speak out against these atrocities against the Bolivian people. During 2020, we campaigned for the right to have free and fair elections by holding public protests. We also demanded the prosecution of Luis Almagro of the Organization of American States for forcibly declaring that there was electoral fraud in 2019 elections, which gave the right-wing racist opposition the excuse to run amok, causing violence and death. Since 2021 to the present, our association has been campaigning for justice for the 37 who lost their lives, and that of Sebastián Moro, an Argentinian journalist who was brutally attacked and who died of his injuries. We stand in solidarity with the victims of the 2019 coup who are still waiting for justice. It's not revenge, it's justice. Finally, we want to tell our Bolivian compatriots que no están solos. We want to tell them that they are not alone, that the Bolivian migrants around the world stand in solidarity with them and will defend the right to proceed with the process of transformation to obtain a life with dignity and sovereignty. Thank you.
Juana, thank you very much indeed, particularly since you're speaking at such a terrible time in the morning. We'll understand if you want to go to bed now, but we'd be delighted if you stayed for the rest of the meeting. Thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is Francisco Dominguez, a really good comrade and expert on Latin America. He comes to us from the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, but so many other groups. We look forward to your remarks, Francisco. You have 6 minutes. The floor is yours. Oh, okay. Apparently he's dropped out, I'm afraid. So now we're going to go to Matt, who is going to talk to us about the Friends of Bolivia. And I hope we'll come back to Francisco in a moment.
Hi, Christine. Yeah, I don't know where he's gone, but his connection must have gone, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you to our friend from Australia and friends closer to home for speaking, and for all the people from Bolivia coming onto the call as well. We're looking forward to contributions. Just a really quick thing for me, really. Friends of Bolivia, as people know, was set up as a social media platform in the run-up to Evo Morales' bid for re-election, and then became more of a campaign against the coup. So it's nice, a year and a half and a bit more on, to be celebrating victory and advances again after that sort of rather rude awakening early in the campaign. The ways you can get involved and support it are similar to all these platforms, and you've probably heard me and others make the spiel before, but I'll do it again anyway. You can sign our statements, you can pass motions in your CLP and unions. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter for all the latest, as well as some of the other bodies that people are speaking from today. And also, please do donate. I know that it can become a bit annoying on these meetings where people keep asking for donations, but it is a purely voluntary platform. But things like Zoom webinar, Restream, which sends it to YouTube and Facebook and things like that, MailChimp, which you send the emails through, web hosting, all these things actually add up to hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds a year. So if you can donate to Friends of Bolivia on the link in the chat, then please do. Any donations would be much appreciated. And just a big thank you from the Friends of Bolivia volunteers for everyone who is being involved today. Thank you.
Matt, thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to see that we've been rejoined by Francisco. I gave you such a big build-up before, Francisco. I'm not going to repeat it, except to say that you're a great comrade, and the floor is yours for the next 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Christina. I apologize to everyone for the technical difficulties that I'm having. And this is an excellent meeting. I want to concentrate on a couple of issues because of the time constraint. I'm not sure that people in Europe understand the nature of the plurinational state of Bolivia. I don't mean the socioeconomic progress that it means. I don't mean the social policies that he's implemented. I don't mean the redistribution of income, which he has done. But it's something much more fundamental than that. And that is of the indigenous majority, and especially of women and all the groups that have been marginalized historically in Bolivia, not for decades, for centuries. That is what the plurinational state of Bolivia actually represents. Is for the very first time in the history of Bolivia, one can take the history of Bolivia from 1825, when it was constitutionally established, but one can even go further than that and go back to the time when the Spanish arrived. So there's no better government. No government in the country of Bolivia has done so much for the people of Bolivia in 500 years as the government of the mass IPSP. This is extremely important. I've seen it myself with my own eyes, the restoration of that were formerly marginalized, and now they're playing a protagonistic role, leading on everything. In fact, Bolivia is one of the countries that have one of the best gender balances in terms of political representations in parliament, in ministries, and so on. So that is extremely important. And what is interesting about this, what is important about this, is the very fact that it's still the oligarchy, but without political power, find this reality totally intolerable. Not only because of the socioeconomic problem, of the socioeconomic dimensions of it, but particularly because they cannot stomach the very fact that there is equality between themselves, supposedly white, minority, privileged, educated, special, superior, compared to these rabble as they see them, this huge mass of people that they kept under oppression and suppression for so long. And that's why they waged the coup in 2019. And I want to highlight in this regard, particularly the insidious, disgusting role of Luis Almagro, who, using the Organization of American States as the instrument, created created the conditions deliberately. This was not an accident. This was very well planned. It was deliberate, and it created the conditions for the coup d'etat to take place. And even coup, and reversed it only in 11 months. Those 11 months gave us an idea of what it could be if those sort of people actually came back to power again. And that's why they still find it intolerable and impossible to live with the very fact that not only these people have achieved the quality of many, many areas, but the very fact that they defeated them again and again and again. And that's why they're still trying to destabilize the situation and using absolutely every single aspect, every single opportunity to actually stabilize and organize regime change and so forth. And this brings me on to my final point, and it is this. Bolivia is one of the architects of a particular item, which is called lithium. If you take the deposits that exist of lithium, which is the mineral of the future, you know, batteries, iPads, computers, electric cars, and so on, will require this Peru, Argentina, and Mexico together. They represent 67% of the total lithium that exists in the planet. So they are already in conversations among themselves. I don't have all the details, but they are in conversations among themselves in order to set up some sort of cartel of lithium, in order to use it not only for the benefit of humanity, but also for the benefit of their own society, and as a very important dimension of the necessary, absolutely urgent process of regional integration that Latin America has to go. If you take the amount of wealth that Latin America contains, the largest deposits of oil in the planet, in Venezuela, some of the largest deposits of gold in the planet, definitely the largest deposits of lithium in the planet, more water than anybody else. Cuba is a biotechnological power, you know, is a medical power of international reputation. Imagine if all these were to come together as they tried in the golden decade between 1998 and 2012, 2014. So that's why it's extremely important to bring in this dimension. John was talking about, this is a wonderful lesson that we in Europe need to draw, which is there is another way to regionally integrate, follow the model of Bolivia, follow the model of Latin America, and you'll see what we'll be able to do once Lula comes back to office in October this year. So, viva Latin America, adelante, thank you.
Viva, thank you so much, Francisco. That's a really important perspective you've advanced for us. And indeed, there is so much to learn from Latin America, and as we say, and this evening from Bolivia in particular. Our next speaker is Miriam Amancay Colque. She's a Bolivian activist and trade unionist living here in London. We're very pleased to have you with us, Miriam. The floor is yours for the next 6 minutes. You're muted. Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good evening, Luis, and good evening as well to my fellow speakers. And thank you very much to Friends of Bolivia for inviting me to speak today. When the mass IPSP returned to power, led by Luis Arce and David Choquehuanca in November 2020, it did so with the premise of first recovering the economy and fighting the pandemic, since the coup plotters dedicated themselves to stealing from the people, leaving the country almost bankrupt and President Arce fulfilled his promises. We can also see there is more development, growth, and the path to industrialization continues. And when the world economy has been shocked by the wave of global inflation, Bolivia, as of March 2022, is the only country with the lowest inflation in Latin America and the fourth lowest in the world. And that is the result of the good management of the economic and social policies of Luis Arce's government, applied through the social, community, and productive economic model. Bolivia now taxes the rich, and until March 2022, the collection of taxes on these large fortunes grew to 2.5%. Bolivia has the largest lithium reserves globally, with more than 21 million tons, and its industrialization continues. Apart from that, many diverse new industries have been opening, creating employment and products for internal consumption and the rest for export. Basic services are provided to the most remote areas of the country. Building schools, hospitals, roads, social housing continue. In an agreement with the COB, Bolivian Workers' Trade Union, like the Bolivian TUC, a 3% increase in the basic salary and a 4% increase in the national minimum wage were decreed. Given the increase in femicides and reports of violence against women and children, on April the 6th, Bill number 179 was approved, modifying the Criminal Code, Criminal Procedure Code, and the Criminal Enforcement Law in order to toughen sanctions for justice operators that are involved in corruption in cases of femicide, rape, and infanticide. The government will review as well the use of extensions of land, and those that do not comply with food production will return to the state. A little over a year after the return to democracy, the trial of the dictator Janine Áñez and her accomplices began. This judicial process is taking too long because her legal defense is making use of legal tricks to disrupt the trial with the support of the opposition. The opposition intend to affect the institutionality of the state, sabotaging the population and housing census as they did it with the election of the new ombudsperson. And they have the media on their side taking a political role, positioning their narratives against the government. On the other hand, the empire, not content with having invaded countries such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and very well used to support self-appointed puppets such as Juan Guaidó of Venezuela, accused Bolivia of alleged human rights violations, launching their attack together with NED-funded NGOs. And in a biased report, they spoke out in support of the coup plotter Janine Áñez, questioning the judicial process, trampling on our sovereignty. They have no moral, judicial, or political authority. We must remind them that we are a sovereign country with dignity and that we will not kneel before the genocidal empire. On the contrary, the world should demand that the empire be held accountable for all crimes committed against our peoples. What the Bolivian people seek is true and justice for the crimes committed during the dictatorial regime of Janine Áñez. We do not want impunity. We recognize that the victims of the coup continue to beg for justice, including the case of Argentinian journalist Sebastián Moro, whose international campaign was recently launched, and I would like to call on everyone to support this campaign to achieve justice for Sebastián Moro and all the victims of the coup. Arturo Murillo, Áñez's former minister, who insulted the victims of the massacres, indicating that they kill each other, escaped to the USA to enjoy what he stole, but was arrested for money laundering. Murillo had the cynicism of wanting to negotiate with Luis Arce's government and receive a forceful response. We do not negotiate with criminals. As you know, in recent days, Joe Biden called on the 9th Summit of the Americas, excluding Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. President Luis Arce made it very clear, if sister nations are excluded, we will not participate in this summit because Bolivia bases its international relations on people's diplomacy with inclusion, solidarity, and respect for sovereignty. The process of change in Bolivia was born from the people, and with it, the nationalization of our resources began with change the destiny of the country, led by the mass IPSP, which is the only major political movement with an overall national presence. And it was Evo Morales, an indigenous brother, who led this historic process. As Jose Luis Rodriguez Zapatero said during his recent visit to Bolivia, equality, progress, dignity, and freedom will be written in the history of Bolivia with the name of Evo Morales. Finally, we know that the shadows of another coup are lurking, and now more than ever, we have to join forces to defeat these threats, deepen the workers and all social movements' unity, and take to the streets again to defend the revolutionary process in Bolivia. The streets belong to the people, and the people will defend democracy, and we are sure that we will also count on the international solidarity. As President Arce said, we recovered democracy in unity, and united we will defend it. On the memory of our heroes of democracy, united we'll resist and we will win. Long live Bolivia and internationalism. Thank you.
Miriam, thank you very much indeed for that brilliant contribution. We will indeed have to be ever vigilant, since, as you say, a coup may always be lurking in the shadows, but we stand in solidarity with the people of Bolivia. Our next speaker is Ollie Vargas. He's a journalist based in Bolivia. Many of you on this call will have heard from him before. He is a vital source of accurate information. Ollie, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks, Christine. Thanks to Friends of Bolivia for organising this event. On lots of different occasions, we've spoken on these Zoom calls, including during the year of the dictatorship, a time when many of us were worried for our safety. But I think now that democracy has been restored in Bolivia, a sense of freedom and liberty reigns once again. I think it's important to focus on other issues such as the economy. And I think Bolivia is at the moment a place where incredibly interesting things are happening. And I think the whole world, progressives around the world, can look to Bolivia for ideas about how to meet the new challenges. And we're in an international situation that is incredibly difficult, with the conflict in Europe and the economic problems that has triggered all around the world, with things such as inflation, shortages of basic goods, rising price of fuel, which has caused a tremendous strain on living standards of people around the world. And Latin America has been hit especially hard with things, for example, such as fertilizer shortages. Fertilizer, which something perhaps if you live in the cities, you don't think about terribly often, but which is crucial to producing the food which we all need day to day. And a global fertilizer shortage, it has catastrophic consequences for food prices, especially for the poorest people around the world. And for example, if we look to countries like Peru, where there's even been strikes by rural workers over the lack of the shortages in things such as fertilizer and other basic goods. Whereas Bolivia, what's going on? Bolivia has a state-owned fertilizer plant that is providing not only for the domestic market, but also exporting to allied countries around the world, including to Peru. Bolivia's promised to ramp up the exports of its fertilizer to Peru. And this is an incredibly important thing. This fertilizer plant was created, with an investment of hundreds of millions of dollars during the government of Evo Morales, and it was closed down during the coup regime by Henry Náñez. The logic was that the state is too bloated. The free market is always more efficient, and we need to cut away this economic intervention by the state. So they closed down this plant. They closed down almost all of the state industries that were built up under Evo Morales. And the task in these past 2 years has been to rebuild all of those state companies. And I would say the most important which has been this fertilizer plant. And now the plan is to, over this year and next, build a second state-owned fertilizer plant. And as you said, this is not a nationalized project. This wasn't never built up by the private sector. This was built from the ground up by the state. And this is something I think in many countries people don't even think about. I think in many progressive circles around the world, the logic is tax and spend. We tax these people at the top, redistribute it a bit to those below. If we want to take public ownership of something, we should nationalize something that has been already built up by the private sector. Whereas in Bolivia, there's a much more creative way of thinking about the economy in which the state takes an active role in creating new industries that the private sector, that the free market has failed to provide. And the issue of fertilizers is one of them. And fertilizer, urea, ammonium, is made of hydrocarbons. Every country, more or less every country in South America has the natural resources to do the same, except they haven't. None has. And that's because the free market ideology has prevented governments from taking the initiative in the way that Bolivia has. And now Bolivia is seeing the fruits of that come out. And if we look at inflation, even before the current conflict in Ukraine, inflation was something that was already creeping up across Latin America in all of our neighboring countries. Brazil has over 10% inflation. Argentina has over 50% annual inflation. This is in 2021. Chile is on 6%, Peru 5%. Bolivia was on less than 1%, 0.9% inflation during the whole of 2021. Why? It's because the state has the power to intervene in the economy on things such as currency controls, export controls. That is to say, when it comes to agriculture, the Bolivian government says whatever you produce has to go to our local market and only excess can be exported. But if there's shortages within Bolivia, then you're not allowed to export anymore, and that extra supply has to go here to ease price rises. That has been a big strategy. Investment in indigenous rural communities so they can produce the food that everyone eats. That's incredibly important. Having control of the central bank, that's something that is a shibboleth in neoliberal economic thinking of central bank independence. Bolivia doesn't believe in that. Bolivia has political control over its central bank and can make decisions about its own economy that way. And a number of other really interesting state initiatives, which I think people around the world should be looking into. Just an example, there's a state food company called EMAPA here in Bolivia. And just the other day, the price of chicken was going up. And so the state food company, because it has various shops throughout the country, said, okay, we're going to start selling chicken at the original price. So then the market automatically has to correct itself and prices stay at their original point. Of course, some of the private businesses said they did a press conference complaining about this. But at the end, what can they do? This is supply and demand, the government coming in to correct prices in the market. These are the sorts of initiatives that people rarely talk about around the world, which I think Bolivia can be a leader in sharing some of these experiences so that others can learn, especially at a time like this when there's an international economic crisis that is most likely going to get worse. And throughout this, Bolivia has fared better than any other Latin American country. Just a study by the UN a few days ago showed that Bolivia was the least exposed to the economic consequences of the war in Ukraine. And this is precisely because what I talked about, the policies that others have talked about as well, import substitution, industrialization. These are all policies They've been ridiculed for years by mainstream economists, but as now we can see the fruits, we can see these are policies that work. These are smart policies, especially when it's done efficiently, as it has been done in Bolivia. So I hope Bolivia can be a beacon of hope for all those around the world who are, anxious about the international economic climate. And I think some of the creativity in how the state can intervene to ensure the economy works for all. That's, I think, the main lesson we can take away from Bolivia at this time. That's on top of course, the victory for democracy that there was in 2020 when a dictatorial government was defeated, firstly by a general strike, by all the unions in the country to force elections to happen. And then once the elections happened, an incredible degree of unity around a political project that could guarantee a transition back to democracy. So I think all of these things are what Bolivia can take to the world. And I hope, more people come, I'd love to see more of you. If you have the opportunity to come to Bolivia, I'll be more than welcome to receive any of you and to show some of the progress that's been made here. So thank you to everyone and to Friends of Bolivia.
That's great, Ollie. Thank you very much. I'm sure many of us look forward to a trip to Bolivia. And that was great, a really interesting perspective. Comrades, before I move to our final speaker, I'm just going to make some quick wrap-up remarks. And they are, first of all, on the behalf of those of you who've joined this webinar, to thank all of our speakers who've contributed in their various extremely interesting, useful and enlightening ways. And also to thank all of you for joining in, because if we didn't have anybody listening, we'd just be talking to ourselves, which would be interesting, but not really quite so good as having other people join in. So so thank you very much for that. In particular, our comrades in Bolivia, of course, for their heroic struggle in showing that another world genuinely is possible, and that we must keep fighting to defeat the forces of evil and US imperialism. And we must stand with Bolivia and stand internationally to win peace and justice around the world. I want you all again to support Friends of Bolivia by donating if you can, following on social media, and keep up your vocal international solidarity with all those struggling for democracy, for social progress, and for self-determination in Bolivia. And now I'm delighted to introduce Diego Pary, who is going to speak in Spanish. So if you want to hear the English translation, do make sure that you have turned to the English channel on Zoom. Diego Pary is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Bolivian ambassador to the UN, and a great international spokesperson for Bolivia's inspiring social change. We're delighted you're with us, Diego. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you very much for all speakers in this important event. First of all, I would like to thank to all Bolivian Friends of Bolivia in UK, in Europe, in around the world. Your help was very, very important to restore the democracy in Bolivia. Now I will speak in Spanish for be precise in the message that I can to talk with you.
Can I just say that we're just waiting for our translator to reconnect. So I hope there will be English translation. So stick with us in the English channel. Thank you for that introduction in English, Diego. On you go in Spanish.
Gracias, Christine. Pues un privilegio para mí estar con ustedes en este evento. Agradecido con todos los amigos de Bolivia. Su aporte, su trabajo, su contribución ha sido muy importante para recuperar la democracia en Bolivia. Estamos claros, ya los compañeros que intervinieron antes, hicieron referencia al golpe de Estado que se ha dado en Bolivia. Después de casi 2 años del golpe de Estado, nosotros podemos ahora evaluar cuál fue el objetivo, cuáles fueron los elementos que justamente contribuyeron a que se diera este golpe de Estado. No es un golpe de Estado casual, ha sido un golpe de Estado planificado, organizado y estructurado por mucho tiempo. Y en ese marco, 2 objetivos claros del por qué se ha dado el golpe de Estado. Primero, el interés en los recursos naturales de Bolivia. Segundo, pues Bolivia no era un buen ejemplo para la derecha, para el capitalismo y para el neoliberalismo internacional. Bolivia, con un programa social comunitario, era un ejemplo para muchos de los países del mundo. Pero ese avance de Bolivia, ese modelo económico y social de Bolivia, pues justamente generaba dificultades a los países capitalistas, generaba dificultades a los países con visión neoliberal. Es en ese sentido que el golpe de Estado tuvo 2 objetivos. Primero, pues hacer que el modelo boliviano fracase. Y segundo, pues apoderarse de nuestros recursos naturales. ¿Qué es lo que ha sucedido durante el golpe de Estado? Hemos tenido la presencia de diferentes actores. Uno de los primeros actores fueron obviamente los actores políticos de la derecha boliviana, acompañados de actores políticos internacionales de la derecha latinoamericana y de la derecha internacional. Participaron activamente diferentes actores políticos de Europa, participaron actores políticos de Latinoamérica, actores políticos de derecha. Segundo, participaron también activamente gobiernos extranjeros. Participó el gobierno de Macri de Argentina y participó el gobierno de Lenín Moreno del Ecuador enviando municiones y armas al Estado boliviano, lo que es absolutamente contrario al derecho internacional. Pero también participaron las Fuerzas Armadas y participó también la policía boliviana. Fueron parte de un golpe de Estado, porque no se puede llamar otra cosa cuando las Fuerzas Armadas y la policía, que son las 2 únicas instituciones que legalmente portan armas en el país, se levantan y le piden renunciar al presidente. No hay otro nombre, es un golpe de Estado. Y finalmente participa también un organismo nefasto, la Organización de los Estados Americanos, la OEA. Es uno de los actores centrales del golpe de Estado, porque la OEA, a través de Luis Almagro, lo que hizo es justificar el actuar de las Fuerzas Armadas. La OEA salió con un informe falso, un informe mentiroso, un informe que finalmente no coincidía con la realidad, un informe que decía cosas absolutamente fuera de la realidad. Lo único que intentó el informe de Almagro es justificar el golpe de Estado perpetrado por las Fuerzas Armadas y los actores políticos de la derecha. ¿Y por qué se convierte en un golpe de Estado? Hoy las fuerzas de derecha todavía intentan justificar su actuar. Según la Constitución boliviana, dice que la presidencia del Senado tiene que ser elegida de la mayoría de los del partido mayoritario en el Senado Nacional. Primero, la sucesión presidencial en Bolivia es cuando renuncia el presidente, lo reemplaza el vicepresidente. Cuando renuncia el vicepresidente, lo reemplaza el presidente del Senado. Cuando renuncia el presidente del Senado, el presidente de diputados. Eso es lo que establece la Constitución cuando efectivamente hay un cambio constitucional. Pero la señora Yanine Áñez era la segunda vicepresidenta del Senado. En caso de darse la renuncia de la presidenta del Senado y del primer vicepresidente, lo que correspondía por Constitución y por el reglamento del Senado es que la señora Áñez convoque a una reunión de todos los senadores y se elija un nuevo presidente del Senado. y este nuevo presidente del Senado debería ser del partido que tenía mayor cantidad de senadores, y en este caso el Movimiento al Socialismo. Eso es lo que dice la ley, eso es lo que dice la normativa del Senado Nacional de Bolivia, que el partido que tiene la presidencia del Senado es el partido que tiene la mayor cantidad de senadores, y en este caso tenía que ser un senador del Movimiento al Socialismo. Pero la señora Yanine Áñez decide no convocar al Senado, decide autoproclamarse, y al autoproclamarse como presidenta del Senado, se autoproclama también como presidenta del Estado sin cumplir con la normativa que tiene el Estado plurinacional. Ahí está la grave vulneración que ha cometido la señora Áñez, y es por eso que en este momento ella está siendo procesada en la vía ordinaria, porque ella cometió esos delitos como senadora, no cometió los delitos como presidenta. Todavía tiene procesos pendientes porque ella también deberá rendir cuentas ante la justicia y ante el país por las masacres que se han dado en el país. Ella fue la presidenta, ella dio la orden, y las Fuerzas Armadas justamente estuvieron involucradas en esto por un decreto que ella aprobó. Y es por eso que...
Diego, just a moment, please. I'm so sorry. I was listening in Spanish, but it's clear that the translation is not working because the translator has been unable to come back onto the call. So this is clearly a big problem. I'm pleased to say I have understood all of your remarks in Spanish. It's been a challenge, but I have understood them. I wonder if I can ask Francisco if he would be prepared to provide some translation for us for the remainder of Diego's remarks. I'm very sorry to everyone who's listening. And we've never had this problem before, but unfortunately the translator had fallen off the meeting. I imagine sequential translation at this stage is probably the best way to do it. Is that okay?
It would be best. It would be best if it was simultaneous, but I'm not sure whether it can be arranged technically. I'd be quite happy to do it.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think
Francisco.
I can allocate Francisco. Sorry, everyone, Matt here. I'm pretty sure I can allocate Francisco to go in this channel if you give me like a second.
Okay.
I think he says.
Hermano Diego, me van a hacer a mí el traductor. Yo soy Francisco Domínguez. Me van a poner técnicamente, así que voy a traducir simultáneamente, así que por favor espere un minuto. Disculpe los inconvenientes.
Okay. I think Matt will tell us when we're ready to move forward.
I think it's now working, but that's definitely an I think. So if Diego starts talking and Francesco starts doing it simultaneously, I will interrupt if it's not working. Sorry, I can't see how else we do it.
Okay, so there should now be when Francisco comes on, there should be English translation. So I'm going to ask Diego to start again, please, and for Francisco to begin the translation. So Diego, don't feel that you need to go back to the beginning of your remarks. Pick up from where you were, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for Christine. It's very important, o es muy importante identificar que en este momento la señora Áñez está siendo procesada por un delito que ha cometido como senadora. Es decir, ella se ha atribuido funciones que no le corresponden y ha vulnerado la Constitución política y las leyes bolivianas. Es por esta situación que ella tiene un proceso en la justicia ordinaria del país. Todavía queda pendiente un segundo proceso cuando ella ya cumplía las funciones de presidenta de facto. Cuando ella ejercía estas funciones, ella dio órdenes y aprobó decretos que justamente liberaban de culpa a las Fuerzas Armadas para que salgan a matar al pueblo boliviano. Justamente tiene que rendirle cuentas a la justicia boliviana, tiene que rendirle cuentas al mundo por las masacres que hubo en Sacaba y en Sencata. ¿Qué ha pasado con el golpe de Estado? El golpe de Estado ha destruido gran parte de los avances que tuvo Bolivia en el último siglo. Bolivia en la última década ha hecho grandes transformaciones bajo la presidencia de Evo Morales. Ha reducido la pobreza del 38.2% hasta el 15.2% en el año 2019. Con Evo Morales, el salario, antes de que Evo Morales llegara al gobierno, el salario en Bolivia era 52 euros. Ese era el salario cuando Evo Morales estaba comenzando su gobierno en el año 2006. Cuando le dieron el golpe de Estado a Evo Morales, en el país, el salario mínimo nacional, el año 2019, era 252. Es decir, se quintuplicó el salario mínimo nacional. Y así podemos encontrar muchísimos otros datos que respaldan justamente la gestión exitosa de Evo Morales, una gestión que transformó la historia de Bolivia, una gestión que hizo de Bolivia un país más digno y un país soberano, un país que le demostró al mundo entero que su modelo económico y político era un modelo capaz de sacar a Bolivia de la extrema pobreza, era un modelo que demostró al mundo que teníamos un modelo capaz de transformar a uno de los países denominados, entre comillas, los más pobres, a ser uno de los países con mayor crecimiento económico, a ser uno de los países con mayores posibilidades de desarrollo. Gracias al esfuerzo del pueblo, de los pueblos indígenas, al esfuerzo del movimiento obrero, el año 2020, exactamente un año después del golpe de Estado, logramos recuperar la democracia. Bolivia recuperó su democracia y hoy el presidente Luis Arce Catacora hace todos los esfuerzos, primero, para poder consolidar y para poder fortalecer nuestra democracia. No puede volver a suceder un nuevo golpe de Estado en Bolivia. Todavía hay intereses desestabilizadores, utilizan el censo, utilizan la redistribución de los recursos, utilizan la redistribución de escaños como motivos para desestabilizar al gobierno, pero estamos seguros que el pueblo boliviano y la comunidad internacional defenderán al gobierno legítimo de Bolivia y no permitirán que se den nuevas intenciones desestabilizadoras en el país. Segundo, presidente Luis Arce Catacora está trabajando, su gobierno trabaja para poder justamente recuperar la economía y fortalecer los programas sociales. Y finalmente, lo que queremos es recuperar nuestra presencia internacional, fortalecer el ejercicio de nuestra soberanía, el ejercicio que como Estado libre e independiente tenemos. Y en ese marco nosotros agradecemos muchísimo el trabajo que hacen los amigos de Bolivia, tanto en Reino Unido, en Europa, en todo el mundo. Quiero agradecerles por todo ese trabajo que ustedes han hecho, por la difusión, por los debates, por las entrevistas a muchas personas que han acompañado la recuperación de la democracia en Bolivia. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much, Christine, for this event. And thank you very much to all Friends of Bolivia around the world.
Diego, muchas gracias. Thank you very much indeed. And let me just say, I'm sorry that we had a little hiccup at the beginning. Our interpretation went down because our interpreter lost power. I thank Francisco, very much for picking that up. And I'm sorry to any of you who missed the initial stages of Diego's remarks, which were, I must say, most interesting. So I repeat again, thank you very much for joining this meeting. I think all of our speakers have been terrific. Thanks again to Francisco for standing in. I hope that we will see you again at a Friends of Bolivia event, and we will be able to hear even more great stories about how another world genuinely is possible. Comrades, solidarity.